So this is the breakdown of Luke chapter 22, part 2. So, third Jewish trial, a legal meeting before the Sanhedrin meet to officially finalize the changes against Jesus. Matthew 27:1, Mark 15:1, and then Luke 22:66 through 71. First trial before Pilates, the Sanhedrin bring their charges to the Roman governor. Matthew 27:2, 11, 14, Mark 15:1 through 5, Luke 23:1 through 5, and then John 18:28 through 38. Trial before Herod Antipas, Pilates sends Jesus to the ruler of Galilee, but Jesus will not answer him. Luke 23:6 through 12. The second trial before Pilates, the Sanhedrin insists Jesus should die, although Pilates knows he's not guilty of anything. That's crazy. Matthew 27:15 through 26, Mark 15:6 through 15, Luke 23:13 through 25, and then John 18:39 through John 19:16. So Luke 22:63 through 65 gives a brief overview of the abuse Jesus suffers in the home of the high priest Caiaphas. That man. Matthew 26:57, and then 59 through 68, and Mark 14:53, and then 55:65 gives more details about what happens at Caiaphas' house. In Luke 22:66 through 71, day breaks and Jesus is taken to an official trial before the Sanhedrin. Before the chief priests, scribes, and elders, Jesus clearly states he is the Son of God. The religious leaders finalize their accusations for Pilates. Matthew 27:1 and Mark 15:1 briefly explain that Jesus is tried before the Sanhedrin and that they decide to charge him with a capital offense. Scholars have suggested that parts of this chapter forms a chiasm, a mirrored presentation of which emphasizes the inflection point. One such argument is as followed: A. Luke 22:1 through 2, religious leaders preparation. B. Luke 22:3 through 6, betrayal preparation. C. Luke 22:7 through 13, new covenant introduction preparation. D. Luke 22:14 through 20, new covenant introduction. E. Luke 22:21 through 30 to 23, the warning of Christ's betrayer. Luke 22:42 through 25, worldly leadership. Luke 22. F is Luke. So they do A through F and then F through A. So then Luke 22:26 through 30 is Christ-like leadership. E. Luke 22:31 through 34, warning of Christ's deniers. D. Luke 22:35 through 38, new covenant spreading introduction. C. Luke 22:39 through 46, new covenant work preparation. B. Luke 22:46 through 62, betrayal and denial. And then A. Luke 22:63 through 71, religious leaders' work. In this structure, the most important theme is whether we accept the new covenant and our place in God's kingdom. Do we reject Jesus' authority, Luke 20, reject his servanthood example, betray him, and use him for our own gain? Or do we accept that Jesus' authority and servanthood example, emulate his servant leadership, and feel the needs of others? That's good. So Luke 23 continues Jesus' trial before Pilate and Herod Antipas. He is then led to the cross where he forgives his murderers and saves a thief before he dies. In Luke 24, Jesus rises from the dead, meets the disciples while they travel, and explains to them how the Old Testament prophesied the death of the Messiah. In the final scene of the gospel, Jesus is reunited with his disciples, blesses them, and then ascends into heaven. Period. So let's get into this other breakdown. So Luke chapter 22 details the events leading up to Jesus' crucifixion, including the Last Supper, where he establishes a new covenant through the Lord's Supper. It also recounts the betrayal by Judas and Peter's denial, as well as Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, his arrest and trial before religious leaders. The chapter emphasizes the themes of love, sacrifice, obedience, and contrast between worldly power and servant leadership. Alright, so the key events and their meanings. The Last Supper and the Lord's Supper. Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper as a memorial of his impending death, symbolizing his body and blood being given for the forgiveness of sins. He established a new covenant, contrasting the symbolic salvation of the Passover lamb with the greater salvation through his sacrifice. Come on. Judas' betrayal. Satan enters Judas Iscariot, leading him to conspire with the chief priest to betray Jesus for money. This act of betrayal committed by one of Jesus' own 12 disciples is a key part of the chapter. Peter's denial. Jesus predicted that Peter would deny him 3 times before the night was over. This is followed by his passionate plea for Jesus to let him fight, but Jesus rebuked him and told him to put away his sword. Jesus prayed for Peter, asking that he would be strengthened and that his restored faith would help strengthen his brothers. Servant leadership. After an argument among the disciples about who was the greatest, Jesus taught them that true leadership in the kingdom of heaven is not about power, but about serving others, teaching that the leaders is like the one who serves. Jesus' arrest and trial. After the betrayal, Jesus was arrested and subjected to a series of trials before the Jewish leaders. Jesus remained obedient to God's will. That's so good. And prayed for forgiveness for those who would betray him. Jesus. Oh. Okay, so the overall meaning before I get to crying. The Passion of Christ. The chapter is a powerful account of the Passion of Christ from the Last Supper to his arrest and betrayal. Human weakness. It also highlights human weakness as seen in Peter's denial and the disciples' dispute over greatness. God's plan. Despite the suffering and betrayal, the chapter emphasizes the overarching plan of God to redeem humanity through Jesus' sacrifice. And the last one is a call to obedience and faith. Luke chapter 22 is a call for Christians to follow Jesus' example of servant leadership, to remain faithful in times of weakness, and to trust that God's redemptive work is unfolding even in our darkest moments. Ooh, that's so good. That's so good. Alright, y'all, that is all I have for the breakdown of Luke chapter 22 part 2, and I'll see you guys later.